They were about to be arrested for being poor until one name changed everything. The sun beat down on Lekki Phase 1. 3 young men knelt beside a broken Range Rover, hands caked in grease, sweat running down their faces. "This alternator is completely gone," Stanley muttered, wiping his forehead. "We'll fix it, we always do," Festus said, squinting at the engine. Martin looked up at the fancy houses lining the streets. "One day, brothers, one day, we won't kneel in the dust." A sleek white Mercedes G-Wagon screeched to a stop behind them. The door opened. Out stepped a woman, dripping in gold and perfume, heels clicking against the asphalt. "What is this nonsense blocking my road?" she barked. Stanley stood slowly, dust falling from his shirt. "We're just trying to help, madam. Her car broke down." "Help," Regina Okoye laughed, venom in every word. "Dirty street rats, you probably broke it yourselves to extort money." Festus's jaw tightened. "Madam, we are honest mechanics. She called us." "Shut up," Regina's voice cut through the air. "I could make one call and have you arrested for harassment." Martin's fist clenched. Stanley placed a steady hand on his shoulder. From inside the SUV, a soft, worried voice called, "Please, I did call them. My car just stopped." The woman stepping out was Mrs. Cynthia Adewale, elegant, sad, and unknowingly about to change everything for these boys. Regina spat her venom. "You are soft, and that's why people like these boys prey on you. They are scammers, beggars." Stanley's hands clenched tighter. "We are not scammers. We are here to help. Our poverty doesn't make us thieves, and your wealth doesn't make you better than us." Regina's face turned purple. She pulled out her phone. "I'm calling the police." "Yes, officer. 3 boys, harassing women. Yes, come immediately." Mrs. Cynthia stepped forward calmly. "That's enough. These young men have been nothing but respectful." She watched them walk on the engine, sweat mixing with determination, their hands moving confidently despite the insults. Something flickered in her eyes, a recognition, a memory staring like dust in an abandoned room. Before we continue, drop a comment and tell us where you are watching from. Stay tuned. What happens next will shock you. Martin whispered, "Let's go. We don't need this trouble." "No," Stanley said firmly. "We finished the job. Our dignity is not for sale." The 3 doublets turned back to the engine, hands steady, heart defiant, even as Regina's threats filled the street. Mrs. Cynthia watched them, hearing their quiet words of encouragement to each other. She couldn't see their faces fully, but something about them felt familiar. And in that moment, something impossible began to happen. A secret long buried was stirring, something that would change everything. Who were these boys really? And why did Mrs. Cynthia's heart skip a beat when she heard their voices? The police sirens cut through the humid Lagos air 15 minutes later. 2 officers emerged from their vehicle, hands resting casually on their belts, their eyes already judging the scene before them. "These are the troublemakers," the taller officer asked, gesturing at the triplets. Regina rushed forward, her jewelry jangling with each step. "Officers, thank God you're here. These street boys have been harassing us, trying to extort money. They probably damaged this woman's car themselves." Stanley straightened up from the engine, his voice calm despite the storm brewing around them. "Officer, that's not true. Mrs. He turned to the woman in the cream outfit. "I'm sorry, madam, we never got your name." Mrs. Cynthia Adewale hesitated, her lips parting slightly. For a moment, she seemed about to speak, but Regina cut in sharply. "Her name doesn't matter. What matters is that you criminals are finally going to face justice." The second officer, shorter and with tribal marks on his cheeks, walked around the triplets slowly. "You boys have ID?" "Yes, sir," Festus said, reaching into his worn wallet. He pulled out 3 identical laminated cards. "We're registered mechanics, Stanley, Festus, and Martin Adebayo. We run a shop in Aja." The officer took the cards, examining them with suspicion that seemed built into his bones. "Adebayo?" Mrs. Cynthia's voice was barely a whisper, but it cut through the tension like a knife through silk. Everyone turned to look at her. She had gone completely pale, one hand pressed against her chest as if her heart might escape. What did you say your surname was?" Her voice trembled now, louder, more urgent. "Adebayo, madam," Stanley replied, confusion crossing his face. "Is something wrong?" The ID card slipped from the officer's hand, fluttering to the ground like a wounded bird, but no one noticed because Mrs. Cynthia Adewale had stumbled backward, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. "It can't be," she whispered, her eyes wide and filling with tears. "It can't be, after all these years." "Madame, are you all right?" Martin moved toward her instinctively, concern replacing his earlier frustration. Regina stepped between them aggressively. "Don't you touch her, you filthy—" "Stop!" Mrs. Cynthia's shout was so unexpected, so powerful that everyone froze. She pushed past Regina, moving closer to the triplets, her eyes scanning their faces with desperate intensity. "How old are you? Tell me now." 23, madame," Stanley said, bewildered. "We're triplets. Why do you—" Mrs. Cynthia's knees buckled. Festus caught her before she hit the ground, supporting her weight with gentle strength. "Madame, should we call an ambulance?" But Mrs. Cynthia was shaking her head, tears streaming down her face now, her hands reaching up to touch Festus's face, then Martin's, then Stanley's, as if confirming they were real and not ghosts summoned from her deepest regrets. "You are alive," she breathed. "All three of you, alive." Regina's expression shifted from anger to confusion. "Cynthia, what is wrong with you? Why are you touching these dirty boys?" The tall officer picked up his dropped ID card, studying it more carefully now. "Madam, do you know these boys?" Mrs. Cynthia Adewale's body shook with sobs that came from somewhere deeper than grief, somewhere closer to the place where guilt and hope lived as uncomfortable neighbors. "Know them?" She laughed and cried at the same time, the sound broken and beautiful and terrible. "Officers, this woman wanted you to arrest them. These boys she called criminals and trash and street rats." She turned to face Regina, and for the first time since they'd met, Mrs. Cynthia's voice carried steel beneath the silk. "These boys are my nephews, my brother Gerald Adebayo's sons, the triplets who disappeared 23 years ago when they were just 6 months old." The street went silent. Even the Lagos traffic noise seemed to fade away, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Stanley felt the ground shift beneath his feet. What did you say?" "That's impossible," Regina sputtered, her face twisting with disbelief and something that looked suspiciously like panic. "These are just common mechanics. They are nobody." But Mrs. Cynthia wasn't listening to Regina anymore. She reached into her expensive handbag with trembling hands and pulled out an old photograph, its edges worn from years of being held, looked at, cried over. She held it up, and the triplets stared at 3 infant faces looking back at them. Identical babies in matching blue rompers, held by a young man with the same jawline they saw in their mirrors every morning. "Your father," Mrs. Cynthia whispered, "Gerald Adebayo, my younger brother. And these are you, Stanley, Festus, and Martin, 6 months old in this picture, 2 weeks before you all vanished." Martin's voice cracked. "That man, that's our father? We only had one photo, and it was so faded we could barely see his face." "You disappeared after your mother died," Mrs. Cynthia continued, her words tumbling out now like water from a broken dam. "My brother was destroyed by grief. He hired a nanny to help with you boys, and then one morning he woke up and you are all gone. The nanny too. He searched everywhere, police, private detectives, newspapers. For 5 years he searched until—" She broke. Martin finished the sentence quietly. "Until he died. He told us before he passed. He said he'd lost everything. He said we had no other family." "He thought you were dead," Mrs. Cynthia cried out. "The police gave up. Everyone said the nanny must have sold you or worse. Gerald died believing his sons were gone forever. And I kept searching even after he was gone, but I never found anything, not a trace, not until today." She looked at their faces again, wonder and anguish mixing in her expression. "You have his eyes, all 3 of you. How did I not see it immediately?" Stanley's mind was reeling. "But how? How did we end up in Aja? Who took care of us?" "Our father told us he found us abandoned at a hospital," Martin said slowly, the pieces not fitting together. "He said he adopted us because he was childless. He raised us for 5 years before he died. Then we went to the orphanage." Mrs. Cynthia shook her head violently. "That man wasn't your father. Your father was Gerald Adebayo, my brother, and he was one of the wealthiest men in Nigeria." The words hung in the air like impossible birds. If you're already hooked on this story, don't forget to subscribe. This is just the beginning, and you won't want to miss what happens next. Regina's face had gone from red to white to green. She backed away slowly, her hand clutching her phone like a lifeline. "Wealthy," Festus repeated, the word foreign on his tongue. My brother owned Adebayo Industries, import and export, real estate, oil interests. When he died without finding you, the family business was held in trust, waiting for his heirs, waiting for you. Stanley felt like he was drowning in air. We've been living in poverty for 18 years. After the man who raised us died, we had nothing. We've been working since we were 12 years old just to survive. And I've been living in luxury, grieving my lost nephews, never knowing you were just miles away, alive and struggling. Oh God, if I had known, if I had found you. The taller police officer cleared his throat. His entire demeanor changed. Madam Adewale, we apologize for any... Apologize to them, Mrs. Cynthia pointed at the triplets. This woman, she turned her finger on Regina, called the police on my nephews. She called them criminals and trash. She humiliated them in the streets. Regina's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for water. I didn't know. How could I have known? You didn't need to know their identity to treat them with respect. Mrs. Cynthia's voice rang with righteous anger. They are human beings, but you saw their poverty and decided that made them less than you. The shorter police officer was already backing toward his car. Madam, we were just responding to a call. We meant no... Go, Mrs. Cynthia said coldly, before I call your superior and explain how you came to arrest 3 innocent men based on nothing but a rich woman's cruelty. The officers practically ran to their vehicle, leaving Regina standing alone in her designer dress, suddenly looking very small, despite her gold and her pride, and her cruelty exposed under the same sun that had witnessed it. Mrs. Cynthia turned back to the triplets, her anger melting back into tears. I know this is overwhelming. I know you have questions, so many questions. But please, please tell me you'll come with me. Let me explain everything. Let me give you back what was stolen from you. Stanley looked at his brothers. Festus's eyes were wet with tears he refused to let fall. Martin was shaking, his hands gripping his own arms as if to hold himself together. Our whole lives, Stanley said, his voice hoarse. Everything we believed about who we are. I know, and I'm so sorry, but you are not alone anymore. You have family, you have me, and you have an inheritance that has been waiting for you for 23 years. Regina made a small sound of distress. Mrs. Cynthia turned to her with ice in her eyes. You wanted them arrested. You called them street rats and criminals. You said they would never amount to anything. Mrs. Cynthia's voice was quiet now, but it carried the weight of justice. These boys you mocked, they are the Adebayo heirs. They are wealthier than you could dream of being, and they earned more respect in poverty than you ever managed with all your gold. Regina's face crumbled. Please, I didn't mean... Yes, you did, Martin said quietly, finding his voice at last. Because you thought we couldn't fight back. You thought we were powerless. Festus added, his voice steady, despite the tears on his cheeks. You thought our poverty made us worthless. But we fixed a car today with our own hands. We work honestly. We help people. What have you done with all your wealth except use it as a weapon? Stanley said nothing. He just looked at Regina until she couldn't meet her eyes anymore, until she turned and walked back to her G-Wagon with her shoulders bent, her pride in ruins, her cruelty exposed under the same sun that had witnessed it. As Regina's white Mercedes pulled away, Mrs. Cynthia took a deep breath and looked at the triplets, her nephews, her brother's sons, the lost boys who had become found men. Will you come with me? She asked softly. Will you let me tell you the full truth about who you are? The triplets stood together in the dust, their lives breaking open like seeds that had been buried too long, finally given water and light and the promise of something they'd stopped believing in, a future that wasn't defined by survival alone.
Mrs. Cynthia Adewale's home in Banana Island was the kind of place the triplets had only seen in movies. Marble floors stretched like frozen lakes, crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings that seemed to touch the sky, and the leather furniture looked softer than any bed they'd ever slept in. Stanley, Festus, and Martin sat side by side on a cream-colored sofa, their worn clothes looking out of place against the luxury surrounding them. They'd washed their hands, but the grease under their fingernails remained, a reminder of the life they'd known just hours before. Mrs. Cynthia returned carrying a leather box that looked older than the triplets themselves. Her hands trembled as she set it on the glass coffee table between them. "Before I show you what's inside," she said, settling into the chair across from them, "I need to tell you everything. The full story. And it's not a pretty one." "We're listening, Ma," Stanley said quietly. The Ma came naturally, a mark of respect they'd learned from the man who raised them, whoever he really was. Mrs. Cynthia opened the box. Inside were photographs, documents, and newspaper clippings yellowed with age. She pulled out a photo of a young man in his 30s, handsome, laughing, his arms wrapped around a beautiful woman with a rounded belly. "Your father, Gerald Adebayo, and your mother, Blessing," Mrs. Cynthia said, her finger tracing the faces lovingly. "This was taken 3 months before you were born. They were so happy, so excited about becoming parents." Festus leaned forward, studying the faces of parents he'd never known. "What happened to our mother?" "Childbirth complications," Mrs. Cynthia said softly. "She was carrying triplets, a high-risk pregnancy. The doctors warned her, but she was so determined to have you all naturally. During delivery, there was bleeding. Too much bleeding. She died on the table, but not before she saw you, all 3 of you. She held you and named you before." Martin wiped his eyes roughly. "She died giving us life." "Your father was devastated," Mrs. Cynthia continued. "Gerald loved Blessing more than breathing. When she died, something in him broke. He could barely function. He loved you boys desperately, but he was drowning in grief. So he hired help, a nanny." She pulled out another photograph, a woman in her 40s with a pleasant, unremarkable face. Her name was Florence Okeke. She came highly recommended. References, certifications, everything checked out. She moved into your father's house to help care for you boys full time. Stanley felt a chill run down his spine. "This is the woman who took us?" "We believe so," Mrs. Cynthia said. "For 6 months, she worked in your father's home. She fed you, bathed you, cared for you. Your father trusted her completely. And then one morning in May, he woke up and you were gone. All 3 of you, and Florence too. No note, no ransom demand, just gone." She pulled out a stack of newspaper clippings. The headlines screamed, "Billionaire's triplet sons kidnapped. Massive search for missing babies. Adebayo family offers 50 million naira reward." "My brother spent everything trying to find you," Mrs. Cynthia's voice broke. "Private detectives, psychics, reward money, newspaper ads in every state. For 5 years he searched. It consumed him. His business partners begged him to step back, to let the professionals handle it, but he couldn't. You are all he had left of Blessing." Martin's hands clenched into fists. "So what happened? Why didn't he find us?" "Because Florence was smarter than anyone gave her credit for," Mrs. Cynthia said bitterly. "We found out later, years later, that Florence Okeke wasn't even her real name. The references were fake, the certifications forged. She was a ghost, and she took you somewhere we never thought to look." "Aja," Festus said quietly. "She took us to Aja and gave us to a man who told us we were abandoned." Mrs. Cynthia nodded. "We think she sold you, or maybe she had a partner, the man who raised you. Either way, she took you far enough from Ikoyi that no one made the connection. 3 baby boys in a poor neighborhood, who would think they were the missing Adebayo heirs?" Stanley's mind was reeling with implications. "But the man who raised us, he wasn't cruel. He was poor, yes, but he loved us. He fed us even when he went hungry. He taught us to read and write. When he died, we cried for months." "I don't know who he was," Mrs. Cynthia admitted. "Maybe Florence's husband or brother, or maybe someone she sold you to who genuinely came to care for you. But the fact remains, he kept you from your real family, from your birthright, from knowing who you truly were." She reached into the box again and pulled out a legal document. "This is your father's will, written 3 months before he died. He never stopped believing you were alive. He left everything, the house, the business, the investment, everything in trust for you to be held until you were found or until you would have turned 25. Festus did the math quickly. "We turned 25 in 2 years. "Yes," Mrs. Cynthia said. "If we hadn't found each other today, in 2 years, the courts would have declared you legally dead, and the estate would have been distributed among distant relatives. You would have lost everything without ever knowing it existed." The weight of that reality settled over them like a heavy blanket. Stanley spoke slowly, walking through the implications.
So this whole time, while we were sharing one room, eating rice and beans for days because that's all we could afford, working 16-hour days just to make rent, we were heirs to a fortune? Worth over 8 billion naira, Mrs. Cynthia said quietly, plus properties in Lagos, Abuja, London, and Dubai, plus company shares, plus investments. You are not just wealthy, nephews, you are generationally wealthy. The silence that followed was profound. Martin laughed suddenly, a sound with no humor in it. I stole bread once, when I was 14. Festus and Stanley didn't know, but I did it because we hadn't eaten in 2 days, and I couldn't watch my brothers suffer. I stole bread, and we had billions of naira sitting somewhere with our names on it. Mrs. Cynthia's tears flowed freely now. I'm so sorry. If I had known, if I had found you sooner. It's not your fault, Stanley said firmly, though his own voice was thick with emotion. You didn't know. Our father didn't know. We were stolen from our lives by someone we should have been able to trust. Festus stood up suddenly, pacing to the window that overlooked the Lagos lagoon. What do we do now? How do we even process this? Slowly, Mrs. Cynthia said. There will be DNA tests to confirm everything legally. Lawyers will need to be involved. The trust will need to be officially transferred. But those are just details. The important thing is that you're home. You're found. You're Adebayo's, and nothing can change that now. Martin looked at his brothers' photographs spread across the table, their mother's smiling face, their father's hopeful eyes, the 3 infant faces that would grow up to become the 3 men sitting in this room. Do you have more pictures? He asked softly. Of them? Of our parents? Mrs. Cynthia nodded, pulling out albums. Hours worth. I'll tell you everything I remember. Your father's laugh, your mother's singing voice, the way they planned your nursery, the names they chose for you and why. Stanley was for Gerald's father, she said, touching the first photo. Festus was for Blessing's father, and Martin was for her brother who died young. Every name was chosen with love. They spent the next 3 hours going through photographs and stories. Mrs. Cynthia told them about their father's love for old jazz music, their mother's talent for cooking, the way Gerald would talk to Blessing's grave every Sunday after she died, telling her about his sons and promising to keep them safe. He broke that promise, Stanley said quietly. Not by choice, but he broke it. No, Mrs. Cynthia said firmly. He kept it in the way that mattered most. He loved you enough to search until it killed him, and he made sure that if you were ever found, you'd have everything you deserved. He kept his promise even beyond death. As evening fell on Lagos, the 3 triplets stood together on Mrs. Cynthia's balcony, looking out at a city that suddenly seemed different. The light that had always represented a world they could never access now belonged to them in a way they couldn't quite comprehend. We are not the same people we were this morning, Festus said softly. Yes, we are, Stanley countered. We are just people who know more now. The money doesn't change who we are. It just changes what we can do. Martin looked at his brothers. What do we want to do? Before either could answer, Mrs. Cynthia called from inside. Boys, there's someone here who needs to see you. Someone who has been waiting a very long time. The triplets exchanged confused glances and walked back inside. Standing in the sitting room was an elderly woman in traditional wrapper and buba, her face carved with the lines of age and sorrow. When she saw them, her hands flew to her mouth and she made a sound like a wounded animal. My grandsons, Gerald's boys, Blessing's babies, you're alive, you're here, you're real. Mrs. Cynthia's voice was gentle. Boys, this is Mama Adebayo, your grandmother, your father's mother. The woman who had spent 23 years believing her grandsons were dead opened her arms wide, her tears streaming down her weathered face. And the 3 young men who had spent their lives believing they had no family walked into the embrace of a grandmother they'd never known existed, their tears mixing with hers, their broken family finally beginning to heal. The news spread through Lagos like wildfire in Harmattan. Within 48 hours, every newspaper headline screamed some version of the story. Missing Adebayo heirs found alive. Mechanics were billionaires all along. Street boys become overnight millionaires. But the story that caught fire on social media was more specific. Rich woman calls police on billionaire heirs. Someone had recorded Regina Okoye's tirade on their phone. The insults, the cruelty, the police call. The video went viral. Within 24 hours, it had 5 million views. Within 48, it was being discussed on every radio station in Nigeria. Regina sat in her expansive living room in Lekki, watching her phone blow up with notifications, each one another nail in the coffin of her reputation. At Lagos Gossip, Regina Okoye called 3 young men street rats and gutter criminals. Turns out they are worth more than her husband. Karma is sweet. At Nigerian Tea, this is what happens when you judge people by their clothes instead of their character. Regina Okoye has entered the chat, and so has Karma. At Walk Lagosian, rich people really think poverty is a moral failing. Regina Okoye just learnt the hardest lesson of her life. Those dirty mechanics own more than your husband says. Her husband, Chief Thompson Okoye, paced the room like a caged lion. Do you know what this is doing to our business? 3 of our major contracts called today. 3! They said they don't want to be associated with the company whose owner's wife humiliates poor people. I didn't know. Regina's voice was shrill with desperation. How was I supposed to know who they were? You weren't supposed to know, Thompson exploded. You were supposed to treat them like human beings regardless of who they were. That's basic decency, Regina. Something I apparently forgot to teach you. Regina's phone rang. She looked at the caller ID and her face went pale. It's Mrs. Adewale. Don't you dare ignore that call, Thompson warned. Regina answered with a trembling hand. Hello? Mrs. Cynthia Adewale's voice was cold and formal. Mrs. Okoye, I'm calling to inform you that my nephews and I will be holding a press conference tomorrow at the Echo Hotel. The media has been relentless, and we've decided to address everything publicly. I thought you should know in case you want to prepare yourself. Mrs. Adewale, please, I am so sorry. Your apology means nothing to me, Mrs. Cynthia cut her off. But you will have the opportunity to apologize publicly tomorrow if you choose. My nephews are more gracious than you deserve. They've agreed to answer questions about everything, including what happened that day on Admiralty Way. The line went dead. Regina looked at her husband with panic in her eyes. She's going to destroy me. They're going to tell everyone what I said, what I did. You destroyed yourself, Thompson said coldly. I've been married to you for 12 years, Regina, and I thought I knew who you were. But watching that video, hearing you talk to those boys like they were trash, I don't recognize you. Thompson, please. I'm sleeping in the guest room tonight, and tomorrow you're going to that press conference and you're going to face what you did. Because if you don't, I swear to God, Regina, I will divorce you myself before your reputation destroys what I've spent my life building. The door slammed behind him, leaving Regina alone with her phone, her shame, and the viral video that had exposed the ugliness she'd been hiding beneath designer clothes and expensive jewelry. Meanwhile, in Banana Island, the triplets were having a very different kind of evening. They sat around Mrs. Cynthia's dining table, which could seat 20 people easily, learning to use the proper silverware for the 7-course meal the chef had prepared. This is ridiculous, Martin muttered, looking at the 5 forks beside his plate. Why do we need 5 forks? Because you are Adebayos, their grandmother said with a gentle smile, and Adebayos know how to move in any circle, whether it's fixing cars in Aja or dining with presidents in Abuja. Stanley picked up the smallest fork experimentally. I'm not sure I want to be the kind of person who needs 5 forks. Then don't be, Mrs. Cynthia said simply. No one is asking you to change who you are. We're just giving you tools to move through the world you've inherited. What you do with those tools is entirely up to you. Festus had been quiet through dinner, his mind clearly elsewhere. Finally, he spoke. Auntie Cynthia, about tomorrow's press conference, I don't have to do it, she said immediately. I can face the media alone. You boys have been through enough. No, Festus said firmly. We want to speak, but not just about what happened with that woman. We want to talk about all of it, the poverty, the struggle, the years we spent not knowing who we were. Martin nodded. People need to hear it, not because we want sympathy, but because there are thousands of boys like us out there. Boys walking in the streets, boys grinding every day just to survive. Maybe our story can change something. Stanley looked at his brothers with pride. We didn't just survive poverty, we maintained our dignity through it. That matters. Mama Adebayo's eyes filled with tears. Your father would be so proud of who you've become. Gerald always said true character isn't revealed in comfort, it's revealed in struggle. You boys have proven that. There was a knock at the door, and a young man in his 30s entered, Mrs. Cynthia's son and the triplets' cousin, Clement. He'd been traveling when the news broke but rushed back to Lagos immediately. "My brothers," Clement said, opening his arms wide. "Finally! I've been an only child for 36 years. Now I suddenly have 3 brothers who are actually cooler than me." The triplets stood, unsure how to respond, but Clement crossed the room and pulled all 3 in a bear hug. "I know this is all crazy," he said, stepping back to look at them. "I know you're probably overwhelmed and confused and wondering if this is all real. But I want you to know something. I've spent my whole life hearing stories about my 3 missing cousins. I've seen my mother cry over you. I've watched my grandmother pray for you every single night. You weren't just missing, you were loved. Even when we didn't know where you were part of this family." Stanley felt something break open in his chest, a wall he'd built years ago when he'd accepted that he and his brothers were truly alone. "Thank you," he said quietly. That means more than you know." Clement grinned. "Also, I've already planned our first brothers outing. There's this spot in VI, Best Suya in Lagos. We're going tomorrow night after the press conference. Just us. No fancy folks, no cameras, just family." "Can we wear our regular clothes?" Martin asked hopefully. "Brother, you can wear whatever makes you comfortable. Though, fair warning, Mama has already hired a personal shopper who's going to have a field day with you 3. She's been planning your wardrobe since the day you disappeared." They all laughed, and for the first time since their lives had turned upside down, the triplets felt something that had been missing for 18 years. They felt like they belonged somewhere. The next morning, the press conference at Echo Hotel was packed. Every major news outlet in Nigeria had sent reporters. Social media influencers streamed it live. The ballroom was standing room only. Regina Okoye sat in the back row, her hands twisted in her lap, wearing a simple dress instead of her usual flashy outfit. Her husband sat beside her, his face expressionless. When the Adebayo family walked onto the stage, the camera flashes were blinding. Mrs. Cynthia spoke first, giving the official statement about the triplets' identity, the DNA confirmation, and the trust that would now be transferred to its rightful heirs. Then it was the triplets' turn. Stanley approached the microphone, his brothers flanking him on either side. He wore new clothes, simple but well-fitted, but he still moved like a mechanic with the careful precision of someone used to working with his hands. "My name is Stanley Adebayo," he began, his voice steady and clear. "These are my brothers, Festus and Martin. 3 days ago, we were mechanics in Aja, living in a single room, working 16-hour days just to survive. Today, we are standing here as the heirs to a fortune we didn't know existed, but we are the same people we were 3 days ago. The money doesn't change that." He paused, looking out at a sea of faces and cameras. A lot of you have seen the video of what happened on Admiralty Way. You've seen how we were treated, you've heard what was said to us, and I want to address that directly. Regina shrank in her seat, feeling hundreds of eyes turned toward her. The woman in that video saw 3 young men in old clothes and decided we were criminals. She didn't know our story. She didn't ask our names. She just saw poverty and assumed it meant we were worthless. Stanley's voice remained calm, but his words cut like surgical knives. And here's the truth. She was wrong about who we were. But even if we were just mechanics with no inheritance, with no famous family name, with no billions in trust, she would still have been wrong to treat us that way. The room was completely silent. Festus stood forward to share the microphone. Every person deserves dignity. Every person deserves respect. Whether they are fixing cars or running companies, whether they are wearing slippers or Italian shoes, whether they have money or they are struggling, everyone deserves to be treated like a human being. Martin added, "We are not angry, we are not bitter, but we want people to learn from this. Don't judge people by their bank accounts. Don't measure worth by what someone owns. We survived 23 years in poverty, and we did it with our dignity intact. That's what matters." Stanley took the microphone again. "To the woman who called the police on us, we forgive you, not because what you did was okay, but because holding on to anger would make us like you. We choose to be better." In the back row, Regina burst into tears. A reporter raised her hand. Do you have a message for other young people struggling in poverty? Stanley smiled, really smiled. Your current situation doesn't define your future. We thought we knew our whole story. We thought we knew exactly who we were and what our limits were. But life surprised us. So don't give up. Work hard, stay honest, treat people well. You never know what tomorrow might bring. Another reporter called out, "What will you do with the inheritance?" The triplets looked at each other and Festus answered, "First, we are going to finish fixing that Range Rover. We started a job and we finish what we start. After that, we'll figure it out. But we know one thing, we are not going to forget where we came from. Poverty taught us things that wealth never could. We are going to honor those lessons." The press conference lasted another hour, but those moments, the triplets standing together, speaking truth with grace, offering forgiveness instead of revenge, those were the moments that would define the story. When it finally ended, Regina approached them with hesitation written in every step. "Please," she said quietly, May I speak with you?" The triplet could have walked away. They would have been justified. But instead, Stanley nodded. "You can speak." Regina's voice shook. "I am sorry. I am so sorry. There's no excuse for how I treated you. I was cruel and judgmental and wrong. I've watched that video 100 times now, and I'm ashamed of the person I see. I don't know if you can ever forgive me, but I need you to know I will spend the rest of my life trying to be better than the woman I was that day." Martin spoke gently. "We already forgave you, Mrs. Okoye. We said it publicly because we meant it. But forgiveness doesn't mean what you did was okay. It means we are choosing not to let your actions define us. What you do with this lesson, that's between you and God. We hope you learn from it. We hope you become better, but that's your own journey, not ours." Regina nodded, tears streaming down her face. She turned to leave, then paused. "You boys, you are more gracious than I deserve, more gracious than I could have been if our positions were reversed. That says everything about who you are." As she walked away, her husband trailing behind her, Mrs. Cynthia put her arms around her nephews. "You handled that beautifully," she said. "We had good teachers," Stanley replied, thinking of the man who raised them in poverty but taught them dignity. "We learned that being poor doesn't make you powerless, and being rich doesn't make you right. We learned the things that actually matter." That night, as promised, the 4 young men, the triplets and their cousin Clement, sat at a street-side suya spot in Victoria Island, eating spicy meat straight from the grill, drinking cold Chapman, and laughing like brothers who'd known each other their whole lives. No cameras, no press, no fancy clothes or 5 forks. Just family, finally whole. 6 months later, Aja looked exactly the same as it always had. Crowded, dusty, loud with the sound of generators and gospel music and traders hawking their goods. But the small mechanic shop on the corner of Badere Road looked very different. Where there had once been a cramped space barely big enough for 2 cars, there now stood a modern 3-story building with glass doors, proper ventilation, and a sign that read Adebayo Auto Center, Excellence to Service. Inside the air-conditioned reception area, a young woman named Favor sat at the front desk, managing appointments on a new computer system. And in the garage below, Stanley, Festus, and Martin worked on a Mercedes S-Class, their hands covered in the same honest grease they'd always known, their focus just as sharp as it had been 6 months ago when they were unknown mechanics struggling to survive. "Hand me the torque wrench," Stanley said, his voice echoing in the spacious garage. Festus passed it to him without looking up from the engine diagnostic he was running. "This alternator is short. We will need to order a replacement." "Already done," Martin called from the parts room. "Should arrive tomorrow." The owner of the Mercedes, a middle-aged man in an expensive agbada, watched them work with fascination. "I still can't believe it. The Adebayo heirs working on my car personally." Stanley looked up and smiled. "Sir, we're mechanics. This is what we do. The money doesn't change that." "But you could hire people to do this. You are billionaires now." "We did hire people," Festus said, gesturing to the 10 young mechanics working at various stations throughout the expanded garage. "We hired 20 people, actually. But we still work because this is who we are. This is what we know. And honestly, we love it." It was true. In the 6 months since their lives had changed, the triplets had made choices that confused a lot of people, but made perfect sense to them. Yes, they'd moved out of a single room, but they'd moved into a comfortable but modest 3-bedroom apartment in Lekki Phase 1, nothing like Mrs. Cynthia's mansion in Banana Island. Yes, they'd bought cars, but they'd bought practical Toyota Highlanders instead of Lamborghinis their cousins suggested. Yes, they'd invested in businesses, but their first investment had been expanding their mechanic shop and creating jobs for young people in Naija who reminded them of themselves. They still worked 16-hour days, but now it was by choice rather than necessity, and somehow that made all the difference. The owner of the Mercedes paid for his service, full price, no family discount, and left shaking his head in wonder. As the triplets cleaned up for the day, their cousin Clement arrived, dressed in a designer suit that probably cost more than their monthly rent used to be. "My brothers," he called, grinning. "Still getting your hands dirty, I see." "Clean hands don't know what hard work feels like," Martin replied, wiping his palms on a rag. "What brings you to Aja, Mr. Fancy Suit?" "Family dinner tonight," Clement said. "Mama Adebayo insists everyone be there. She's cooked enough food to feed half of Lagos." "We wouldn't miss it," Stanley said. "Just let us close up." As they locked the garage and set the security system, a far cry from the simple padlock they used to use, a young boy approached. He couldn't have been more than 12, thin as a wire, with hope and desperation fighting for space in his eyes. "Please, Saz," he said quietly. "I want to learn mechanic work. I'm strong. I can work hard. I just need someone to teach me." The triplets looked at each other, seeing themselves in that boy's hungry eyes. Stanley knelt down to the boy's level. "What's your name?" "Jerrison, sir." "Jerrison, are you in school?" The boy's face fell. "No, sir. My parents can't afford it. That's why I need to learn a trade." Festus pulled out his phone and made a quick call. "Mrs. Olagene?" "Yes, it's Festus Adebayo. I'm sending another scholarship candidate your way. Can you process him by tomorrow?" "Excellent. Thank you."
He turned to the confused boy. "Jerrison, here's what's going to happen. You're going back to school. We have a foundation that pays for everything: tuition, books, uniforms, even food. While you're in school, you can come here on Saturdays and learn mechanic work. When you finish secondary school, if you still want to be a mechanic, we'll give you full training and a job, but education first. Deal?" Jerrison's eyes went wide. You would do that for me?" "We would do that for 100 boys like you," Martin said gently. "We're already doing it for 73. You'll be number 74. The boy burst into tears right there on the dusty street, and Martin hugged him while Stanley wrote down the foundation's address and contact information. As they watched Jerrison run off clutching the paper like it was solid gold, Clement shook his head in amazement. "You three could be living like kings," he said. "Parties every night, different cars for every day of the week, women throwing themselves at you. Instead, you're working in the garage and putting street kids through school. I don't know if you're the wisest men I know or the craziest." "Maybe both," Stanley said with a smile. "But we remember what it felt like to be hungry. We remember what it felt like to have people look at us like we were nothing. We can't forget that, and we won't." That evening, Mama Adebayo's house in Ikoyi was filled with family, laughter, and the smell of jollof rice, egusi soup, pounded yam, and grilled fish. The triplets sat at the large dining table. They had finally gotten used to having enough space, surrounded by Mrs. Cynthia, Clement, various cousins they were still learning the names of, and Mama Adebayo herself presiding over the feast like the matriarch she was. "Tell them the news," Mrs. Cynthia prompted, smiling at the triplets. Stanley set down his fork. "We've decided what to do with the main inheritance, the trust, the properties, all of it." The room went quiet with curiosity. Festus continued. 20% goes into a foundation for education and vocational training for underprivileged youth across Nigeria. Another 20% goes into healthcare initiatives in underserved communities. 30% will be reinvested into growing Adebayo Industries, but with new policies, better wages for workers, more community development, and ethical practices throughout. "And the remaining 30%? A cousin asked. Stanley smiled. "That's for us to live on and to do good with as opportunities arise. We're comfortable, we're secure, we don't need more than that." Mama Adebayo stood up slowly, her aged hands gripping the table, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of years and wisdom. "My grandsons," she said,
her eyes moving from one triplet face to the next. When you were stolen from us, I prayed every night for your return, but I also prayed for your character wherever you were. I prayed that whoever raised you would teach you to be good men, and my prayers were answered in ways I could never have imagined. She wiped tears from her wrinkled cheeks. You came back to us not as spoiled rich boys, but as men who knew the value of hard work, who understood suffering, who learned humility and dignity in the school of poverty. You came back better than we could have made you if you'd grown up in wealth. The trials that were meant to destroy you instead refined you like gold in fire. She raised her glass. To Stanley, Festus, and Martin Adebayo, my grandsons, your father would be so proud. Your mother would be so proud. I am so proud. Everyone raised their glasses and the toast echoed through the room to the Adebayo brothers. After dinner, the triplets stood on the balcony, looking out at the Lagos skyline, the same city that had once seemed so impossible and now lay before them full of opportunity. Do you ever wonder what our lives would have been like if we'd never been taken? Martin asked quietly. Every day, Festus admitted. But then I think about all the people we've met, all the lessons we've learnt. I think about Jerrison's face today when we told him we'd send him to school. We wouldn't be who we are without the journey. Stanley nodded thoughtfully. We lost 23 years with our family. We grew up in poverty when we should have had everything, but we gained something too. We learned what actually matters. We learned that dignity isn't about money, that respect should be given freely, not earned through bank accounts, that the measure of a person is in how they treat others when there's nothing to gain from it. So, do we regret it? Martin asked. I regret that our father died believing we were gone. I regret that we didn't get to know our mother, but the rest of it, the struggle, the poverty, the years of working with our hands, no. That made us who we are, and I like who we are. Festus put his arms around his brother's shoulders. We were stolen from wealth and thrown into poverty. We survived betrayal and loss and humiliation. And when we finally got everything back, we didn't become the people who hurt us. We became better. That's the real victory. From inside, they could hear Mama Adebayo starting to tell stories about their father, funny ones now, mixed with the sad ones, building a picture of the man who loved them even in their absence. The triplets went back inside to listen, to learn, to become part of the family story that had continued without them for so long, but now finally had space for them again. And miles away in Lekki, Regina Okoye sat in her living room watching the evening news feature about the Adebayo Foundation's latest school opening in Ajah. The camera showed Stanley, Festus and Martin surrounded by children in brand new uniforms, the triplets' faces glowing with genuine joy as they cut the ribbon on a classroom building that would educate hundreds of kids who looked just like they had at that age. Thompson walked into the room and paused as she watched his wife's face as she stared at the screen. They're remarkable, aren't they? He said quietly. They're better than me, Virginia whispered. I had everything and learned nothing. They had nothing and learned everything. Thompson sat down beside her, the first time they'd sat together in months. Their marriage was still fragile, still broken in places, but slowly being rebuilt with the honesty that had been missing before. You can still learn, he said. It's not too late to become who you should have been. Virginia nodded slowly. On her coffee table sat a volunteer application for the Adebayo Foundation's literacy program. She'd filled it out that morning. No name dropping, no mention of her wealth or connections, just a simple application to help teach children to read. She picked up the envelope. I'm going to drop this off tomorrow. They might not accept you, Thompson warned. I know, but I have to try. I have to be better than the woman in that video, even if it takes the rest of my life. She looked at the screen again, where the triplets were teaching a group of children how to check a car's oil level, combining education with practical skills, refusing to separate from the work that had made them who they were. They forgave me, Regina said softly. Now I have to forgive myself, and then I have to earn the person I should have been all along. Never judge people by their current circumstances. The mechanic in one's slippers might be royalty. The street vendor might be a genius. The maid might be a prophet. We're all just people trying to survive this life with our dignity intact. Treat everyone with respect, not because of who they might be, but because of who you are. And remember, Storms pass, seasons change, and today's humiliation might be tomorrow's testimony. Stay good when life isn't. Stay honest when it costs you. Stay humble even when you finally win. Because in the end, the only thing you truly own is who you chose to be when everything was against you. Drop a comment below and tell me, what would you have done if you were in the triplets position? Would you have forgiven Regina? Would you have stayed in the mechanic business or moved into full-time wealth? And what's the biggest lesson you're taking from this story? Don't forget to subscribe for more powerful African moral stories that will make you think, feel, and see the world differently. Hit that subscribe button now. Your next story is just one click away.